Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining Verité's webinar on demystifying human rights due diligence for companies, suppliers, and traders sourcing agricultural commodities. It's been good to see so many familiar names on our registration list. We also welcome those of you who have never engaged with Verité before. We will wait one additional minute to allow for a few more participants to join. Okay, thank you all for making the time to join us today. Let's get started. My name is Rachel Rigby, and I'll be guiding us through the webinar today. I am a senior program director at Verité, where I lead many of our consulting partnerships with companies sourcing food, beverage, and agricultural ingredients. I'd like to introduce our other speakers that we are fortunate to have joining us. They are Elizabeth Garland, Chief Program Officer of Verité, Sofia Licona, Corporate Social Responsibility Manager at Ingenios Santos in Mexico, Frederic Tali, Senior Program Manager at Verité, and Pamela Schreier, Global Head of Cocoa Sustainability for Ecom Agro Trade. Thank you all for being here. This is today's agenda. We will begin with some background about Verité and our Farm Labor Due Diligence Initiative. We will then explain why we are releasing this toolkit and why now. This will be followed by a walkthrough of some key highlights of the toolkit. And throughout the session, we will hear perspectives from our guest speakers, who are seasoned human rights due diligence practitioners in agricultural supply chains around the world. Few housekeeping notes. All participants' microphones and cameras have been turned off for the event. Throughout today's session, if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A function. The Verité team will attempt to answer as many as we can in writing in real time. We will also save all of your questions and respond in a follow-up communication. We are also recording this session and will distribute it publicly after the webinar. I'll turn the floor over now to Elizabeth Garland to provide a brief introduction to Verité and to give you some background on how and why we created our new Farm Labor Due Diligence Toolkit. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome everyone. It's great to see so much interest in this important topic. I'm Elizabeth Garland, as Rachel mentioned, Chief Program Officer at Verité. Since you may not all be familiar with Verité, I thought I'd kick us off today by sharing a little bit about who we are and how we work as an organization. Verité is a mission-driven, fully nonprofit, non-governmental organization dedicated to promoting safe, fair, and legal conditions in workplaces and supply chains worldwide. For nearly 30 years, we have worked to drive social impact with corporations, civil society organizations, governments, and workers in almost 100 countries. We are a diverse, multilingual team, currently numbering 88 people based in 12 different countries, and we regularly collaborate with a global network of consultants and partners as well. Our staff are able to engage at all levels of supply chains, from the C-suites of multinational corporations to the offices and facilities of Tier 1 suppliers, and with upstream suppliers, producer groups, and unions and other worker organizations. We have a multi-pronged organizational approach to driving impact at Verité. We have a vigorous research program that conducts assessments, special investigations into labor issues, and independent research on root causes and labor conditions in sectors and key geographies. We also operate largely, much of our work is through building capacity of companies, civil society organizations, government agencies, and workers to drive improvements in labor practices in workplaces and supply chains. And we also promote effective policies and regulatory frameworks to create an enabling environment for good labor practices through our advocacy work and our engagement in multi-stakeholder initiatives and coalitions. An important part of our mission at Verité includes creation of tools and sharing of our knowledge and innovations with the public. We're fully mission driven, so we're committed to getting what we learn out to others to use and to try to help, for them to help amplify impact, to transform norms and practices within the broader field. We have an established track record of publishing practical resources on key issues. Some examples of our previous work in this regard include the Responsible Sourcing Tool.org website, which we built to help companies providing federal contracts to the US government and others understand and prevent forced labor and human trafficking in their supply chains. Our Fair Hiring Toolkit provides concrete practical guidance on ethical recruitment of migrant workers for a range of different kinds of stakeholders relevant to the adoption of ethical recruitment as a norm in transnational migration hiring. And our coffee toolkit is an example of several different toolkits that we have on specific commodities, focused in that case on prevention and mitigation of child labor and forced labor risk in the Latin American coffee sector. I would encourage all of you who are interested to explore verite.org, which is our core domain, which has many resources, including various risk research and other kinds of publications that we've put out over the years. Today, we will be launching a major new public resource in this tradition on the subject of human rights due diligence, with a focus in particular on due diligence in the supply chains of agricultural commodities. On a personal note, I'd just like to say that it's extremely gratifying to me to see so many colleagues and collaborators here who have worked with us on our work on due diligence in agriculture over the years. We've learned so much working alongside you and inside your supply chains, and are thrilled to share what we have learned with the broader audience today. So why has Verité decided to develop a farm labor due diligence toolkit, and why at this time? The answer to this has to do with the steadily intensifying scrutiny that labor practices in global agricultural supply chains have received in recent years, and of the heightened expectations placed on companies to respect human rights in their global business practices, particularly commodity sourcing companies. This slide summarizes some of the key milestones that have characterized the current era of intensifying oversight of global supply chains, particularly in commodity-based industries. The discussion of all labor rights in global commerce has really been guided in the last century by the core ILO labor rights conventions adopted, many of them, including prohibitions against forced and child labor in the early decades of the 20th century. But in the last 15 years or so, 15, 20 years, we've seen a real intensification of focus on corporate supply chain accountability around labor rights, shifting from the realm of voluntary sustainability reporting frameworks and disclosure acts to increasingly hard law instruments, including forced labor import bans and mandatory due diligence laws, starting really as early as 2010 with the California Transparency in Supply Chains Act, the French Duty of Vigilance Act in 2017, and followed by a series of others in key European importing countries. And most recently with the European Union's deforestation regulations and corporate sustainability due diligence directive coming online. Pressure has been building in the realm of civil law as well, in the form of activist and consumer civil litigation and general consumer awareness campaigning. All of this has led to the emergence of human rights due diligence as a critical requirement of doing business for global companies. And the question of how to do this, what human rights due diligence actually looks like in practice, has really emerged as an urgent issue for enterprises up and down global value chains. At Verité, we've really welcomed this turn to human rights due diligence within the fields of sustainability and corporate social responsibility more generally. Our own approach at Verité to promoting better labor practices within companies has always emphasized the importance of management systems as the key to driving enduring improvement for workers. The framework we're launching today pulls together many of the lessons we've learned over the years about what it takes to implement and continuously improve human rights due diligence in practice. As for the question of why we've decided to focus our initial HRDD public resources around farm labor due diligence specifically, in part, we wanted to respond to the pervasiveness of serious human rights issues in many agricultural supply chains. For example, accounts of human trafficking and forced child labor in the cocoa sector have received a great deal of attention. Recruitment-related exploitation by of transnational migrants in the oil palm industries in key origins like Malaysia and Indonesia, or in coffee and sugarcane in key Latin American markets, is also a real issue in ag. Health and safety and gender-based harassment and discrimination issues, sub-minimum wage payment are endemic issues in the sugarcane and tea sectors, among others. And increasingly forced labor and state-sponsored forced labor, even in the cotton industry, has received significant attention with the, among others, the adoption in the United States of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, barring imports of goods made with cotton from the Xinjiang region of China. Finally, forest conversion and land rights issues associated with crops that grow in forest contexts, such as cocoa and oil palm, also have received increasing regulatory scrutiny. So agriculture is in the spotlight. It's clearly an area where regulators are sorting out frameworks, figuring out what kinds of approaches will work. And many of those new regulatory mechanisms position human rights due diligence as a core requirement, or at least an important tool for addressing such issues. But there are many reasons why extending due diligence to agricultural supply chains can be quite challenging. Some of these reasons have to do with the nature of agricultural production itself, the prevalence of dependence on migrant labor, temporary and seasonal labor, given the way that crops are produced and harvested, and others reflect capacity and infrastructure issues in key origin countries, limiting the capacity of implementing partners such as suppliers or cooperatives or extension agencies or civil society and state collaborators that might be relied upon to provide mitigation or social services for victims of exploitation or abuse. We've also seen and recognized as a community of practitioners the limitations of audits and certification schemes in providing adequate assurance in agriculture. And then finally, there are some competing imperatives that companies are facing around transparency and disclosure of their performance on human rights. So you're being exhorted to implement due diligence systems that monitor and report on your performance in around human rights issues in your supply chain, and simultaneously being sometimes punished by regulators for that level of disclosure. So it can be quite confusing how to navigate those different kinds of imperatives. So to address all of these kinds of challenges, Verité decided to really focus on farm labor due diligence as a kind of way to help articulate what we think is needed in the field. We created in 2021, as part of an action pledge for the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor, the Farm Labor Due Diligence Initiative, which is a Verité-led collaboration between private sector and civil society partners that we work with and share in terms of priority and approach, to help to take stock of what we have collectively learned, both at Verité and in the field and among our partners over the past decades of doing this kind of work, to really clarify and define what good practices look like, and to create practical guidance and other tools to help companies, suppliers, and agricultural producers eliminate labor abuses from global agricultural supply chains. We have focused, although we created the the initiative as part of the Year for the Elimination of Child Labor and have thought about child labor as a key salient issue, obviously, in agriculture. We have understood from the outset the initiative to be relevant to all of the core labor rights, including forced labor, but also respect for freedom of association, protections of health and safety, and prevention of discrimination as well. Just a note about our advisory council to guide us and advise and support us in this work through the Farm Labor Due Diligence Initiative. We established an advisory council of external partners, and they've helped us with input on topics, helped prioritize our efforts, provided feedback and validation of the materials we were producing, and are actively, in many cases, piloting and helping us share the learnings from the tools in question. Development of the materials themselves was carried out by a core technical working group that met regularly. And in this regard, I'd like to extend a special thank you to Anna Kleitsidou from Philip Morris International, who helped us conceive of the Farm Labor Due Diligence Initiative from the outset. We've learned so much from working with PMI on its program to combat to address labor rights in its tobacco supply chain. And Anna has also been a staunch supporter of the FLDDI from the beginning. I'd also like to thank Inga Jacobs from Mars Incorporated. Mars and Inga have both supported the project actively from the beginning. Both Anna and Inga personally participated in the technical working group and helped write some of the tools that you'll see today. I'd also like to extend my warm thanks to all the other members of the Advisory Council, many of whom are with us here today. And finally, I would be remiss not to thank our colleague, my own colleague, Rachel Rigby, who you've already met, who participated in the technical working group as a staffer at Rainforest Alliance for the first 2 years of the initiative before joining our ranks here at Verité. And it's my pleasure to hand over the reins to Rachel now to give us a tour of the toolkit.
Thank you so much, Liz, for all of that context. Okay, now let's take a look at the new toolkit. First, I'd like to provide an overview of the toolkit structure. It's organized into 6 elements, and each element has various components. I won't read the name of each component out loud, but we will stay on this slide for a few minutes to allow you to kind of digest the structure. Those of you who are familiar with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's, or OECD's, due diligence framework will recognize that we have aligned our toolkit closely to that structure. It was the decision of our full advisory council to use the OECD framework as our backbone, and we think that works well since most of the due diligence laws that have been passed in recent years are more or less aligned to the OECD as well. As you can see reflected in this structure, we at Verité believe that human rights due diligence must be comprehensive. Every one of these components is important to due diligence. In recent years, as companies have been starting to get a handle on their human rights due diligence, we've really seen progress in some areas. For example, many companies are doing component 1.1, human rights policies and codes of conduct. Many are doing internal training, which is component 1.4. Many are doing saliency assessment, component 2.2. Many are doing auditing, which is one type of monitoring, under component 4.3. But there are other areas where we have not seen a critical mass of companies really engaging. Areas like 1.3, changing procurement practices to align and support the company's human rights objectives. 3.3, rigorous action plans in countries of sourcing to tackle human rights risks, harms, and root causes. Another example would be 6.3, public reporting on impact. Most of the public reporting that we see on human rights still focuses more on process than on impact type indicators. Now, we understand that most companies are not yet implementing all of these components. This is complex work that takes really years to develop, but we do encourage them to start and to make continuous improvement in all areas. And the toolkit provides specific guidance on how to do that. As you will see in a moment when we walk through a specific example, each component of the toolkit is built around this maturity model. This allows users of the toolkit to benchmark their current activities on each component and understand whether those activities represent basic, established, or leadership level practice. Let's look at an example of a specific element tool. This is element 3, cease, prevent, and mitigate human rights risks and harms. Each element begins with an overview of its components, which you can see on the left side, and an introduction to the element, which you can see on the right. Now, let's say that you're a company user and you're particularly interested in making progress on component 3.2, setting indicators and targets for your human rights performance. You would scroll to that component, which begins with an introduction to the topic of setting indicators and targets. The next page then describes what basic level performance looks like on indicator and target setting. So we begin with a description of basic level performance. The company has developed high-level KPIs to measure progress towards its human rights objectives and its impact on salient issues, and has set targets for each indicator. To the right, in the How to Get There column, we lay out the action steps that a company needs to take to reach that basic level, such as review the KPIs used by major customers or peer companies, review mandatory human rights reporting and disclosure requirements under relevant laws, develop draft KPIs and targets, do a round of internal consultation, or maybe more. Often it takes many rounds of internal consultation, and finally obtain senior level approval. Now, if you've taken a look at this basic level and found that your company is already at this level or has surpassed this phase, then you would move on to the next maturity level, established, which is structured in the same way. So at the established level, the company should have built out its KPI framework to include supporting indicators and targets to drive progress on human rights due diligence, implementation, and impact. As you can see, at each maturity level, the action steps to the right in the How to Get There column are quite specific. These steps truly reflect the way that Verité works with our clients, seeking to strengthen their performance in each area, in this case, performance on KPI development. Finally, this is the leadership level, again, structured in the same way. At the leadership level, we would expect a company to be actively using its impact indicators and targets to drive continual improvement in the effectiveness of its human rights due diligence system at reducing risks and harms. So that gives you a snapshot of the content of each component of the toolkit. Again, just as a refresher, here we are in component 3.2 under element 3, cease, prevent, and mitigate. Each of the other components is organized the same way using the same maturity model. At the end of each element, we have included this maturity benchmarking tool. This is a compilation of the descriptions of each maturity level for each component. So this is meant to make it easy to benchmark the company's performance in all of the areas of that element at a glance. Finally, each element finishes with a further resources section. This is a curated collection of tools and examples from a variety of companies and organizations. Many of you are on the line with us today. These are resources specifically related to the subject matter of that element. We often hear from companies that they are overwhelmed by the sheer number of NGO publications and tools and guidances out there. And so we've tried to include here resources that we really think are the most useful and germane to each area of due diligence. We will continue to update and refresh these resources over time as new material is published and developed. And we also will be piloting components of this toolkit with our partners, and will then publish our learnings here in the further resources section. I'd also like to make you aware of our maturity benchmarking tool. So this is available as a separate resource on our Farm Labor Due Diligence Initiative website. This tool brings together the maturity benchmarking tools from each element. As you'll recall, I just showed you the one from element 3, into one consolidated tool. So this allows companies to take stock of their human rights due diligence approach as a whole and identify the areas that they may need to prioritize for improvement. Now we will begin to hear from people who contributed to the development of the toolkit. and who engage in the daily work of implementing human rights due diligence in their own companies. First, I'm pleased to once again welcome Pamela Schreier, Global Head of Cocoa Sustainability from Ecom AgroTrade. Pamela has been a member of our advisory council from early on in the initiative, and she will speak to the way that a global trader specializing in coffee, cocoa, and cotton sees the challenges of extending due diligence in complex agricultural supply chains and the usefulness of a due diligence framework such as this toolkit. Over to you, Pamela.
Hi, as Rachel said, I'm Pam Schreier. I'm the head of cocoa sustainability for Ecom, but also I sit internally on our group strategy for ESG and compliance. We have different committees internally, and I sit on those as well. So I have a bit of a perspective over our other commodities that we work on and how we're approaching due diligence in those commodities as well, which are principally coffee, cocoa, and cotton, but also we have some smaller commodities that we work in. And historically, we have focused a lot of our due diligence around our direct supply chain, which is where we have kind of the highest influence. But as a trader, we play a lot of different roles in the supply chain. So we do have direct origin operations, but we also trade cocoa beans and products, and as well as coffee. And then as well, we also have processing capacity. So we have factories where we're buying ingredients into those factories, where we don't necessarily always source from our direct supply chain. So when we look at our direct supply chain, that's where we have the most experience. It's where we have the most visibility and the highest level of influence. We've implemented over time kind of a high touch scenario where we have direct interventions with farmers and farmer groups, and we have tons of data on it, and household level data, and can make a lot of decisions on how we are managing the risks in that supply chain based on that data. However, we've been struggling, as most traders probably are, in kind of how do we go into our larger supply chain. It's not really feasible for us to replicate that model in our larger indirect supply chain, but we know that we have to demonstrate progress, and also in the face of all the regulation, we need to report on how we're interacting with our suppliers in that larger supply chain and how their progress is in basically furthering our own human rights due diligence, since we don't have visibility to the farm level on that side. And so from the beginning, when we were invited to join the Farm Labor Due Diligence Initiative, we were really excited because we felt this was a way that we could make that feasible. We could kind of have some sort of plan to engage those suppliers and resources we could provide to them, so that they could kind of implement the same level of due diligence that we're implementing in our direct supply chain in their own supply chains. But it gave us a point to start with, right? Because while we've developed our own processes internally for our direct supply chain, they're not necessarily always the same that our suppliers would have the resources or the capacity to implement. So we needed to have access to new material that would allow them to kind of figure out where they were in their maturity levels. So we really think this framework is going to be great for us. One, because it has this capability of giving the suppliers somewhere to start. It allows us a good way to communicate what is human rights due diligence, what does it actually mean in practice, and then also it gives us an ability to rank our suppliers. So we have suppliers that have varying levels of formality, from kind of very informal origin-based suppliers to very formal traders that are basically at the same level as us. And this framework gives us the ability to kind of to map out those suppliers and segment them into where they might need the highest level of support from us. It also allows us to kind of proceed as we want to, which is to avoid exclusion of informal actors just because they can't report at the same level as us from the beginning. And it'll give us the tools to communicate kind of why we want to take that approach, and how those suppliers can eventually get to a higher level of maturity. So we think these tools are going to be key to our human rights due diligence going forward. They're going to be key to what our approach is with our suppliers, as well as how we report on it externally. And it really gives us the resources we need to make the due diligence like implementable? It's the word we use internally all the time, but how do we actually carry this out in practice? And we think the toolkit is super practical and will be really helpful for our approach going forward.
Thank you so much, Pam. Yes, implementable is what we were going for. So glad to hear you had that reaction to it. And thanks so much for all your inputs into it as we were developing it. You touched on many issues that are right there in the toolkit: supply chain mapping, procurement practices, monitoring suppliers, and many others. Thanks again for being here with us today. And next, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Verité's Senior Program Manager, Verité-led. So as we just heard from Pamela, the toolkit contains guidance that is relevant and useful for company personnel at the global level of the company. But as we are about to hear, the toolkit also provides guidance on due diligence activities in sourcing countries, often implemented by the company's local teams. For example, key due diligence activities include building the knowledge and capability of suppliers to identify and manage human rights risks in sourcing countries. I will now give the floor to you, Frédéric. Frédéric leads Verité's partnerships in Côte d'Ivoire with companies that source cocoa. Frédéric will give us some examples of his work in this area.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel, my dear colleagues, and hi everybody. Hi from West Africa, where I'm currently located, actually doing work on the human rights due diligence. I would like to say that Verité has been working in the West Africa for years, and through this quick communication, I would like to share some of the things we have seen here in the regions. The number one is just the child labor, in the research child labor. Child labor has been an issue, human rights issue, which has been on the ground for the past I would say for the past decade. And as such, the companies have been taking a lot of measures to address these issues. And first of all, I would like to say those who the child laborers are mostly from migrant workers, from our experiences here, farm workers, and also shop workers. So migrants are those that are coming from neighboring country in the cocoa producing area like Mali, like Burkina Faso, and now like Niger because of the situation happening in the area. So even say that company has been doing a lot, to help families, affected family via income generating activities so that the family can have some income to get out children out of labor, because one of the root cause was poverty. Until recently, we haven't heard about forced labor, and forced labor is a new concept, is a new plea that has been around, and also this is something that also need to company will need to address. People are mostly victims of forced labor are again the same migrant people coming from a neighboring country. Of course, the cocoa area in this area in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire are kind of a area that attract workers, and the transhumance of human is just high, which expose them to some of the risks. So the migrants from Mali, Burkina, and Niger, as well as the sharecropper, and also farm workers are the most victim of this forced labor. They are victim because what? They are of the status of migrant, and as you are not in your country and somewhere else, you just are naturally most vulnerable. So it's critical that also stakeholders understand that the concept of forced labor, and in order to tackle the issues. So this has been also one priority for stakeholder or suppliers here in this area. And as such, Verité has conducted to support those stakeholders and suppliers in training them in forced labor. Mostly the field-facing agents, sustainability committee, as well as surveyors, any workers, any agent from the suppliers who have clients, or we are the farm-facing activities. We have formed and trained them in forced labor, and this has just capacitated them to understand forced labor indicators as well as human rights indicator, to also understand, how to identify those indicators, the risks, and also how to respond to those risks when they face it in the operating zone. So we have done this now that everybody, all the suppliers and also the workers or the stakeholder have understood what forced labor is and how to identify it. Now, the next priority was to what to do in case of forced labor in the area. So most of the thinking has been, or the help that were requested have been to find some protocol to respond to those. So Verité has been working heavily to work with some companies and suppliers so that to strengthen the forced labor response protocol to make it solid so that we can react to forced labor cases and also other human rights abuse cases in the supply chain. On top of those, there was also other mechanism that also has been going how to respond to child labor, for instance. But it is also been working on client need and base on the CLMS, which is a child labor monitoring system from some of the suppliers. They have something already, but what is come to notice that no workers or stakeholders, farm workers, or the victim are not using those systems. So we are also working to support those clients, those companies, to strengthen the system, the ceremony system, so that they meet the international standards. Also, they be the most efficient as possible. So these are mostly what we've been doing here, and on those silent human rights issues as part of the human rights due diligence in the field. So thank you so much for your attention, and I appreciate if there's any questions in that line to just disclose, showcase again the work we're doing here in the West African region on the cocoa farming productions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frederic. Really appreciate that. And indeed, if anyone has questions based on what either Pamela or Frederic has shared, feel free to put those into our Q&A function. So those were great examples of implementation of some of the topics that we cover in the toolkit. Thank you again, Frederic. There is one additional tool that I'd like to bring to your attention today, also something that we're launching today. This is our First Mile Toolkit, which is a companion to the full Farm Labor Due Diligence Toolkit. The First Mile Toolkit provides guidance on human rights due diligence specifically targeted for first mile operations. What do we mean by the first mile? The first mile of an agricultural supply chain begins at the farm and includes the first point where commodities from different farms are aggregated. So examples of first mile operations would include palm oil mills, sugar mills, coffee wet mills, cocoa cooperatives, cotton gins, and fruit packing plants, among many others. As Liz noted in our webinar earlier today, many of the most salient human rights risks and harms in agricultural supply chains are found at farm and first mile level. So companies sourcing agricultural commodities cannot stop their due diligence at Tier 1. OECD due diligence requires action at the level where risks are greatest, as do many of the emerging laws and regulations. But first mile operations are often small with relatively simple management systems and record-keeping practices. However, these management systems can be optimized and used for effective human rights due diligence. The First Mile Toolkit is organized in much the same way as the main Farm Labor Due Diligence Toolkit. In the box to the right, you can see all of the components of the First Mile Toolkit. Each component is organized exactly the same way as the main toolkit, using the same maturity model and action steps. The main difference between the First Mile Toolkit and the main toolkit is the audience. We wrote the First Mile Toolkit specifically for the staff of first mile operations who are carrying out due diligence at that level of the supply chain. Just like the main toolkit, the First Mile Toolkit also has a maturity benchmarking tool. First mile operations can use this tool to benchmark their own progress. And companies that use the Farm Labor Due Diligence Toolkit to guide their own due diligence actions can also use the First Mile Toolkit to assess their suppliers' practices, align their suppliers' practices to their own, and help suppliers meet their code of conduct and other human rights due diligence requirements. The First Mile Toolkit also includes a curated collection of further resources. The First Mile Toolkit is also available in Spanish. This is the only part of the toolkit that is translated into a foreign language to date, but we do hope to ultimately translate the full toolkit into multiple languages. We would like to acknowledge the contributions to this First Mile Toolkit, not only from our advisory council members, but also from the Fundación Avina through the Periplo Project and the U.S. Department of Labor through the Senderos Project. It is now my pleasure to turn over the floor to Sofia Licona, Corporate Social Responsibility Manager at Ingenios Santos. We will hear from Sofia via a video. She will be speaking in Spanish, and the English translation will be shown in subtitles.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Sofía Licona y yo trabajo como gerente de responsabilidad social en Ingenios Santos. Ingenios Santos es el tercer productor de azúcar en México. Alrededor de 480,000 toneladas de azúcar son producidas al año entre azúcar estándar y azúcar refino. Y tenemos 6 ingenios en todo el país, los cuales emplean alrededor de 4,000 personas directamente. Pero también trabajamos con más de 20,000 productores, quienes nos abastecen de caña y quienes a su vez contratan alrededor de 10,000 cortadores al año. Parte de mis responsabilidades en la empresa es la de alinear los principios de responsabilidad social con las prácticas de nuestros empleados, así como integrar una perspectiva de derechos humanos en nuestras operaciones. Y también colaborar con nuestros proveedores, clientes, agrupaciones cañeras, para afrontar los retos que se presentan en nuestra cadena de suministro. A nivel nacional, la industria azucarera se enfrenta a una serie de retos que hemos logrado detectar. Por ejemplo, la presencia de menores en el campo, la complejidad de nuestra cadena de suministro y la falta de conocimiento respecto a la normativa, tanto de productores como de cabos y trabajadores en el campo, así como las malas prácticas laborales normalizadas en el sector. Ingenios Santos no posee tierras, se abastece de los productores de caña, quienes a su vez reclutan, contratan y supervisan su mano de obra. La composición de la mano de obra varía mucho de un ingenio al otro y puede incluir trabajadores locales, foráneos, de alguna etnia indígena. En su mayoría todos son hombres. Como parte de nuestra diligencia de vida en materia de derechos humanos, hemos hecho una amplia evaluación de riesgos y hemos identificado principalmente la presencia de menores en el campo, la deficiencia en temas de salud y seguridad, así como las malas prácticas al momento del reclutamiento y la contratación. Como parte de nuestra diligencia de vida en materia de derechos humanos, hemos hecho una amplia evaluación de riesgos y hemos encontrado principalmente los siguientes 3, que son la presencia de menores en el campo, la deficiencia en temas de salud y seguridad, así como las malas prácticas en la contratación y el reclutamiento. ¿Cómo afronta Ingenios Santos estos retos mencionados? Pues bueno, se creó Iniciativa Unión como un programa de responsabilidad social para trabajar en el campo, en donde invitamos a clientes y a las agrupaciones cañeras para trabajar en beneficio de los cortadores. Iniciativa Unión lo comenzamos en la zafra 1920, en la zona de la Huasteca Potosina, en donde están 2 de nuestros ingenios más grandes, aunque ahorita estamos preparándonos para implementarlo en el resto de los ingenios. Es importante mencionar que todos nuestros esfuerzos se basan en sistemas de gestión y debida diligencia, así como la colaboración con nuestros proveedores de caña para mejorar sus capacidades y ayudarlos a hacer frente también a estos retos. 3 acciones claves que estamos tomando para enfrentar estos retos. El primero es que en la zona de la Huasteca logramos integrar las tareas de este monitoreo a las actividades diarias de nuestros inspectores de campo. Esto nos ha permitido recolectar información en tiempo real sobre los riesgos y las tendencias que suceden en el campo y desarrollar un programa de prevención y respuesta focalizados. Al día de hoy, el 87% de nuestras zonas de abastecimiento en la zona de la Huasteca están monitoreadas por este equipo de inspectores de campo, así como un grupo de analistas en responsabilidad social. En segundo lugar, estamos trabajando en la sensibilización y capacitación de agentes claves de este primer eslabón, como lo son los productores, los cortadores y los intermediarios laborales. En los últimos años hemos capacitado más de 8,000 personas en temas de salud y seguridad, de reclutamiento responsable y riesgos de trabajo infantil. Creemos que el desarrollo de capacidades en estos intermediarios laborales es clave para el desarrollo del programa, ya que es el eslabón de la cadena donde más riesgos laborales hay y también donde más falta el conocimiento y las herramientas para modificar las prácticas. Y en tercer lugar, tomamos medidas concretas para reducir los riesgos laborales. Por ejemplo, la entrega de equipo de protección y utensilios de sombra, descanso e hidratación para intermediarios laborales y para cortadores en el campo. Estamos convencidos que Ingenio Santos no puede llevar a cabo esta tarea solos. Por eso es que el programa de Iniciativa Unión cubre este paraguas donde se incluye a los clientes y a las agrupaciones cañeras, porque estamos convencidos que el trabajo en equipo es la única manera de sobrellevar estos retos. También pensamos que a largo plazo nuestra iniciativa puede dejar pruebas de que el trabajo en el campo mexicano puede ser de forma distinta. Todos estos cambios que hemos hecho en la empresa, las inversiones, la creación de sistemas de gestión para llevar a cabo todos estos objetivos, en Ingenio Santos creemos que vale la pena invertir en estos sistemas de gestión. Ponemos mucho empeño en estos planteamientos de sistemas de gestión porque estamos convencidos que invertir en ellos es de beneficio para nuestros trabajadores como para la empresa. Vemos que muchas de nuestras empresas homólogas buscan distintos tipos de certificaciones y aunque creemos que son buenos, nuestro enfoque va más allá de una certificación. Las herramientas que nosotros estamos implementando son hechas a la medida para las problemáticas de Ingenio Santo y no son soluciones estándares como se pueden ver en una certificación. Además, al centrarnos en la creación de capacidad y el involucramiento de todas las partes interesadas, podemos integrar nuestras prácticas de responsabilidad social en nuestras tareas diarias y no solamente prepararnos para una auditoría anual. Muchas gracias por invitarme a participar y platicarles un poquito de la experiencia de Ingenio Santos. Me gustaría cerrar recalcando de nuevo la importancia de hacer equipo en estos proyectos. Este tipo de implementaciones requieren de mucho esfuerzo, de mucho dinero y de mucho recurso humano. Y es necesaria la intervención de los diferentes agentes claves, entre los cuales se encuentran los clientes. Nosotros sin los clientes no hubiéramos podido lograr lo que se ha logrado. Hemos tenido la suerte de trabajar con diferentes clientes y marcas como lo son Mars, Barry Callebaut, Kellogg's, entre otras, con quienes nos da mucho gusto trabajar en este viaje de mejora continua y quienes reflejan con acciones de este tipo su interés en mejorar el abastecimiento de caña de azúcar en México. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Sophia. Those were very, very inspiring words to hear. And it's been just an amazing journey to learn alongside you and your colleagues at Grupo Santos these past several years. We're really quite inspired by your dedication and to the hard work you've done building monitoring systems, developing programming to address root causes of tough issues, and strengthening the capacity of relevant actors like crew leaders, recruiters, and mill staff to safeguard good labor practices in your sugarcane supply chains in Mexico. It's been really an honor to work with you.
Bueno.
Now, to wrap us up, we have about 12 minutes left, and I thought I would start by reflecting just a bit on the framework and approach that we're publishing today. As we've discussed, and as all of you are, I think, well aware, human rights due diligence is the term of the day. It's the term of art of the day. And we've been really excited to see this emerge as the framing, as I said, of the need on the side of company practice for driving improvements in labor practices and supply chains. Obviously, there's only so much companies can do themselves. The enabling environment that surrounds them in terms of government policy, both in producing and importing country contexts, and in terms of obviously freedom of association, organizing by workers, and worker-driven approaches to holding companies accountable is crucial, as well as a kind of counterpart. But companies do have a role to play. Human rights due diligence, we think, is a valuable framework for articulating that need. And we think it's really an advance over the days when corporate social responsibility just meant compliance audits and maybe a few goodwill projects here and there deployed by companies with the cameras rolling, not to be cynical. We think meaningful, comprehensive human rights due diligence means implementation and continuous improvement of effective management systems, and that really will drive impact for workers. We've seen it in the work that we've done with Ingenio Santos and other clients, and we're really committed to helping make that the knowledge necessary to create those systems available to everyone. Our hope is that the toolkit we're offering here today will help companies at all levels of supply chains tackle this challenge. So as human rights due diligence moves from a kind of abstract aspirational concept to a series of effective systems and concrete actions, real practices, we would encourage you to just get started. This can be a daunting process. We hope that our benchmarking tools provide a good place to get started. You can use them to take stock of where you stand and where your company is and your supplier partners are in their journeys on this, and to identify gaps in your programming and improve what you have. As Rachel noted, I think at the very beginning, lots of companies have some of these pieces in place, but most companies don't have all of them in place, and they really are interdependent. It's the whole of the system reinforces the progress. So it's in our view, all of the pieces are necessary. We would encourage you to just get started. It can be overwhelming, so we encourage you to start where you are. Don't judge yourself. It's better to get started than not to get started, and to commit to doing more over time. We're here to help you and support you as you go. And finally, I would just note as a final comment that the Verité Farm Labor Due Diligence Initiative is an ongoing project. This toolkit is a major product of phase 1 of that initiative, but in the coming months, we plan to carry the work forward, building out additional tools, translating the materials into additional languages, making the whole toolkit more accessible through an interactive website, and piloting tools in collaboration with hopefully many of you, and reporting back on how that's going, and continuing to produce more materials as we learn as we go. We would encourage all of you to download the toolkit and visit verite.org/FLDDI. You can scan this QR code to access that site and download the full toolkit. It's also available on your cell phones. And for any of you who are interested in supporting our work on this and to joining the initiative potentially as part of the advisory council, please do reach out to Rachel Rigby at rrigby@verite.org for more information on that. Thank you so much for coming. Rachel, I don't know how we have just a few minutes. How are you thinking about question and answer at this stage?
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. And thank you everyone who is attending and sending good questions into our Q&A function. Our webinar is officially concluded, but for those of you who'd like to stay, we will pick up some of these Q&As from the question and answer function, and happy to answer them verbally. So I'll go over a few of the ones that we have already answered. One was, do we accept or do we welcome input from workers and workers' organizations? And the answer is absolutely yes. I guess I had two answers to that. One is any of our teams who are based in the field or based in the global north would welcome dialogue with any workers organizations that wish to provide feedback on the tool. There is a contact us and a comment area on our website, but beyond that, if people don't want to use a website form, we are happy to engage person to person to receive input. The other point I would make there is that Verité's methodologies in everything that we do, whether it's investigations, audits, assessments, research, always relies heavily on the worker voice. Worker interviews are a key part of everything we do. And these tools have been developed based on all of our years of experience working, not only with clients, and that's who this webinar is geared towards today, is companies who source from these agricultural supply chains, but also the workers in those supply chains are always a part of how we approach these issues. So yeah, two-part answer. It's already embedded in there, but we still would welcome and really appreciate further input from workers and workers' organizations. There's another question that we haven't answered yet in writing, but happy to do so verbally, from Namrata Raju. Thank you for your question. So Namrata is asking, how do we deal with conundrums that arise during the action and remedy phase? For example, if a company identifies child labor risks associated with a certain factory, it could be that they stop sourcing from there. While that is understandable, it could result in job losses for many workers if the factory were to close down. I'm sure there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer, but what does your research indicate on how to proceed in these cases while still centering workers' needs in the Global South? This is a really, really important issue. Responsible exit, or also when to stay and continue engaging. And it's always a gray area. There's no firm, definitive line between when to stay and when to cut ties. But I agree with you, Namrata. First and foremost, we think that the workers' needs should be paramount, and a really serious consideration should be given to how will it affect workers and affected stakeholders if there were to be a severing of ties. That said, companies that source from partners, suppliers that are known to have repeated violations of labor rights, we understand why companies would want to at some point cut ties. Those repeated violations are very disruptive for the company's sustainability staff and function, and it sends the wrong message to continue to source from a company that is not complying with the code of conduct and that has repeated violations. Our methodology is basically focused on support suppliers whenever you can. These things are not easy to do. Due diligence at the first mile level is resource intensive, is hard work, it takes time. So it is incumbent on downstream buyers to support that work as much as they can. And then at a certain point, after a lot of intensive engagement and support, if things aren't changing, or if you really detect that there is a lack of willingness to do the due diligence at that level, there are responsible ways to disengage. I wonder if we have any further comments on that from any of my colleagues, if you'd like to add. Okay. Another thing I've noticed. Oh, sorry.
Thumbs up for you. No, sir, thumbs up.
Okay. Thanks, Frederic. I've noticed a few comments coming in about recruitment fees and responsible recruitment issues. And we know that is a really key area of concern, a key salient issue that comes up in many supply chains, including agriculture and raw materials. So we do address the issue of recruitment fees in the website. Verité also in the toolkit. On our website, we also have a fair number of other resources on fair recruitment and recruitment issues, because we've worked on that issue throughout the world in a lot of different contexts. So I would encourage you to check out the Farm Labor Due Diligence Initiative Toolkit, but also our Fair Hiring Toolkit, our Responsible Sourcing Toolkit. Our Coffee Toolkit has resources on responsible recruitment specific to coffee. And we also have a forthcoming resource. Liz, what is the name of it? The Recruitment Cost Calculator.
Yes.
Which is a very specific and action-oriented tool to allow buyers to really understand specific costs associated with recruiting workers from a particular geography or in a particular corridor. And that is geared towards helping buyers actually help cover the costs of recruitment, implementing the employer pays principle.
Yeah, I would just add to that on the subject of recruitment and any other specific labor issues that people are thinking of as they listen to this presentation, that the toolkit is really it's it's speaking to the challenges of human rights due diligence broadly. So it's not focused on specific salient issues like child labor or forced labor. It's generic in that way, and it's also not sector specific, although it is focused. It's tailored to agricultural supply chains and the characteristics of agricultural supply chains. It's not focused on any particular crop or the ways that that particular crop is sourced or produced. So I think in that sense, it's a starting point. It's like a framework for thinking about how to do this work, but then you can apply it in different ways to different industries and different challenges. And recruitment would be one issue. Ethical recruitment is a structural fix in the way that companies do business or producers do business in recruiting laborers in order to prevent a salient issue like forced labor risk for migrants. But there also would be approaches to recruitment that might focus on remedy if a migrant has been found to have been charged recruitment fees or other kinds of exploitation experienced. So remedy and remediation is handled as one of the elements of the framework, and the specific remedy in question would be tailored to the issue in question and the case in question. So there's a lot of application of this. What we hope to do at this frame is provide the sort of structure or build out further the structure that was already provided by the UN Guiding Principles and the OECD implementation guidance on due diligence to provide more operational steps that companies can take to do that adaptation themselves.
I'd love to continue to answer more questions, but we are out of time. So we will compile all of the questions and share them with participants along with a recording of this webinar. Thanks again to all of our panelists and speakers for being with us, and for our participants. We couldn't have done it without you. Wishing you a good rest of your day.
Thank you all. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Rachel.